Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you this brand new technique that I've developed. This is a revolutionary and game-changing technique to separate the lens from the capsule 100% guaranteed. Now, what we normally call this is hydrodissection, and we use fluid wave to separate the lens from the capsule or bag. And that's the standard technique of cataract surgery. But I'm going to show you a technique I've never seen before, and this is called pneumodissection. And so the beautiful thing about this technique, this provides you a 100% guarantee of successful separation of the lens from the capsule or bag. And this requires zero modification of your technique if you perform capsule fornix hydrodissection. And so this is the case. You can see capsulorhexis has already been performed. I slide the Kim capsule fornix hydrodissection cannula under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, point the tip down, and you get this immediate pneumodissection wave. And then you start to decompress the bag, push the air back up into the anterior chamber, and that's the case. And so let's go ahead and review that in slow motion because that happened very fast. So first of all, you need the right-angled Kim capsule fornix hydrodissection cannula, and I developed this with Katina. And this is a blunt, tipped, right-angled, and it's a little bit longer than the typical right-angle cannula. And it slides under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally. You can see I go through the main incision. I go under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, and you can see I do this with my typical hydrodissection technique every time. And then I point the tip down, and as I push the plunger, you can see a beautiful pneumodissection wave. It goes all the way from one end to the other. You have complete capsule bag filling of the air, and then very carefully decompress the capsular bag, and you can see the bubble is just sliding out towards the left side. I'm just gently pushing down, and the bubble slides out from the left side, and of course the bubble wants to come anteriorly because it's lighter than the fluid, and so it comes up into the anterior chamber, and then when it's up out of the bag, go ahead and evacuate the air from the anterior chamber. The beautiful thing of this technique, pneumodissection, requires no adjustment to your technique, especially if you're doing capsule fornix hydrodissection. Remember, with capsule fornix hydrodissection, I've always lauded it as a technique that gives you consistent hydrodissection waves. But since you're using air, you want to make sure that the cannula is deep in the bag. And of course, I got an immediate wave. And now look, I go ahead and, with BSS, start to loosen up the lens. You can see the lens was already very, very loose, which shows that the pneumodissection did successfully separate the lens from the capsular bag. I lift the incision with the chopper, go in with irrigation off to minimize Descemet's trauma, removing the surface epinuclear material, sliding the chopper under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, defecative vertically sub-incisionally, fracturing the lens completely in half with opposing forces, that's double chop, sliding the chopper under the right heminucleus, hooking the peripheral lens, pulling it centrally toward the facetip and crushing it against the facetip, and that is the cross chop. Lifting that first quadrant with some vacuum and then crushing it with opposing forces into smaller pieces, and then carefully emulsifying the lens piece using sparing amounts of ultrasonic energy and vacuum. You can see how easily the lens spins, and that's the whole point of showing this case, that the lens is definitely nice and loose. I'm not struggling to spin the lens. It's spinning very easily. I'm able to turn the lens, eat that second quadrant up, turn that second heminucleus in front of me, placing the chopper around the lens, hooking the peripheral lens, pulling it centered toward the facetip, and fracturing the lens in half in another cross-chop maneuver, eating that third quadrant up, and then hooking the peripheral lens around that fourth quadrant, crushing it with another cross-chop maneuver, breaking the pieces into smaller pieces, and then emulsifying the lens piece. So again, easy rotation of the lens. I'm encountering no resistance. Again, the pneumodissection very effectively helped separate the lens from the capsular bag. And this is the epinucleus, very carefully using the facetip, evacuating that epinucleus, keeping the chopper deep in the bag. So I take the chopper out, push BSS in, take the phaco tip out, and I go in with the INA handpiece. Starting sub-incisionally, I'm going to peel the cortex, And let's see how well the pneumodissection helped with this step as well. So I have a nice thin layer of cortex. I'm starting from anterior to posterior, peeling off and teasing the cortex off the capsular bag. And you can see very nice and easy peeling of the cortex from the capsular bag after pneumodissection, not hydrodissection, pneumodissection. Go to polish mode, polishing underneath the rexus edge. You see those bubbles in the anterior chamber, they're actually stuck in the viscoelastic that's coating the corneal endothelium, which is an indicator that you have excellent corneal protection and a nice thick layer of OVD that's coating and protecting the corneal endothelium. All of this is possible through leveraging mechanical fracturing concepts and principles, minimizing high vacuum near the cornea, maximizing mechanical fracturing maneuvers to break the lenses up into smaller pieces, and then pulsing it with ultrasonic energy and vacuum. By doing it this way, you use less ultrasonic energy and vacuum, and thereby less removal of OVD, which you want to keep within the eye, especially to coat the corneal endothelium. And of course, if you coat the corneal endothelium better, when you're done with the case, post-op day 1, you're going to have nice, clear corneas. Go ahead and sweep under the rexus edge, first on the left side and then the right side. This is with the sweep, removing the lens epithelial cells. You can see the bag is pristine, really, really clean after pneumodissection. The lens is going into the capsular bag. And then I'm going to go with the ironing handpiece, disengage the haptics off the optic, get underneath the lens, removing the viscoelastic from within the bag and then from the anterior chamber, and then I'll hydrate my incision. So again, this is a technique to share pneumodissection, a brand new technique. I've never ever seen anyone do this technique. Pneumodissection worked extremely well. Now, to be honest with you, I did not develop this technique as a revolutionary technique. My technician accidentally had a big bolus of air in the syringe. And so when I did my typical capsule fornix hydrodissection technique, instead of BSS coming out, a giant glob of air came out. This is actually not intended. This was an inadvertent revolutionary technique in that when I pushed that plunger, air came out and I suddenly stopped, of course. And therefore I didn't blow the posterior capsule or anything like that. And the truth is I saw the wave occur and then I stopped. It was very controlled, quite honestly. And then of course, you pause, you go ahead and decompress the bag. I evacuated the air, and then I made sure I went in with BSS with the hydrodissection, the Kim capsular fornix hydrodissection cannula, and made sure that the lens was certainly loose, which it was. And then I proceeded with the case. But again, I think this is really cool. Perhaps it can be a technique that can be utilized on a regular basis. Certainly, if you have a big bolus of air, remember the surface area of air, it wants to become round. And so when you push that air underneath the lens, between the lens and the posterior capsule, it's obviously going to try to ball up. And when it balls up, it's going to push the posterior capsule back and thereby more effectively and efficiently separating the lens from the posterior capsule. So quite honestly, pneumodissection theoretically and realistically is a more efficient technique to separate the lens from the capsular bag. Remember, when you're using BSS and you're trying to use an obtuse angle cannula or whatever you've seen in my previous videos, sometimes the BSS takes a U-turn and comes right back into the anterior chamber and you have a failed hydrodissection. And so that's why I developed capsule fornix hydrodissection technique. I place the cannula under the rexus edge contraincisively, point the tip down, and you know that the tip is longer, as I've shared, and because it's blunt, it's very safe. And then you just push that cannula tip, and the hydrodissection wave works all the time. I've never had a failure of that wave, and this is why I advocate for everyone to convert to capsule fornix hydrodissection. This is the best technique in my opinion. I think that if you had air utilizing it in any other technique, the air would have just gone into the anterior chamber and you're like, oh, whoops, there's air in the syringe, and then, not a big deal. And then you would just remove the air. But in this case, because the cannula position is so effective and so well positioned, you got that wave that went right back where it's supposed to, separating the lens from the posterior capsule. To me, this illustrates and validates the point that capsular fornix hydrodissection is the most efficient way to get that hydrodissection wave. And in this case, I achieved a pneumodissection wave, again, which not surprisingly achieved a very good separation of the lens from the capsular bag. And then I was able to perform my typical techniques, double chop, cross chop, mechanical fracturing techniques. And this case went just fine. Again, I'm showing you a brand new, revolutionary, game-changing technique that was completely inadvertent, pneumodissection, to help you separate the lens from the capsular bag. So I hope this was helpful to you and entertaining for you, and I thank you for your attention.